Hey everyone, Sky here to discuss The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, starring Ian McKellen, Martin Freeman, Richard Armitage, Evangeline Lilly, Lee Pace, Luke Evans, Benedict Cumberbatch, Stephen Fry, Kate Blanchett, and Ian Holm, and directed by Peter Jackson. Now, I do remember seeing this in the high frame rate in the IMAX 3D at the time. And I also did the same thing with the first Hobbit film. And did I like it then? Well, the first time I saw the first one, I was like... Well, actually, this was my second viewing when I saw it in the HFR. It was, I was a little thrown off by it. But here, I got used to it. But does it make me like the movie? Well, let's get into it. We pick up right off when the desolation of Smaug ended, with Smaug about to attack Lake Town, and Tauriel, Fili, Keely, and a couple of other dwarves escape, and Keely is fine like a snap of a finger? That didn't make sense to me. Bard manages to escape the prison he was left in by the end of the last movie, and the master of the town is killed off after he pushes his assistant, Alfred, into the water. And I wish I could say good riddance, but he comes back later on as the comic relief. But the master is dead, which thank God for that. Bard tries to kill Smaug, and his son Bane gets the arrow that can kill Smaug and jumps in to save his father, and Smaug is chatty again here like he was last week. And Bard shoots Smaug with the arrow and kills him as soon as that sequence ended. I asked myself, why isn't it the ending of last week's movie? It bothered me so badly to the point that I wish it ended right after Smaug got killed. It was a very poor editing choice, in my opinion. There's a lot of poor editing choices. I'll talk about them. Gandalf is trapped by the orcs, and we hear Galadriel is coming, and then we move on to the next scene, which is, again, very poor editing. The next scene is Keely gives Tauriel the stone, and they talked about last week, and Alfred tries to take a blanket, and Alfred is again very pointless in this movie as he's the comic relief, absolutely pointless, and the whole Lake Town tries to kill him, and Bard, after Alfred puts him as a hero, for some reason lets Alfred live, and I really wish Alfred died at this point in the movie. The dwarves that we left behind last week get back to the Misty Mountain, and Thorin is not himself as he's infected with the dragon sickness, looking for the Arkenstone until we see Bilbo took as he escaped Smaug last week when he goes invisible. I wish we found that sooner than that. It again bothered me at this point of the movie. We see Bolg escape Legolas, and Azog tells Bolg to go back to a place called Gundabad, which sounds German, by the way. And Legolas and Tauriel head there as well. Third time in a row, I'll say, bad editing choice. Because we go back to Gandalf, Galadriel, Elrond, and Saruman, and they save Gandalf and the Brown Wizard's life, and Saruman says, "Leave Sauron to me." And I'm thinking, yeah, right. He's going to join Sauron 60 years later. Bad choice for Saruman's part. Taranduil, I don't know if I said that right, but never mind that, brings food, water, and an army of elves against the dwarves to get the white gem, which is a jewel. And Bard tries to reason with Thorin to not go to war with anyone and honor his agreement with the gold. Thorin refuses, so Thranduil has no choice but to go to war with the dwarves, and it's how we get the chapter in the book called The Battle of the Five Armies. Richard Armitage does a good job of acting mentally ill for greediness, of dragon sickness, I should say. Gandalf reasons with Taranduil and Bard about orcs coming to the dwarves for war, but doesn't care. Then Bilbo goes to them to trade the Arkenstone, and Thorin, after he finds out Bilbo had the Arkenstone the entire time, almost throws Bilbo off a cliff, and Thorin's cousin Dane comes into the fight, and the elves come help the dwarves after the orcs come into the fight, and the dwarves, and we see Alfred screwing up too many times after Bard asks him to do something and gives it to someone else. And I really wanted to see Alfred die, but we do in the extended cut, and Thorin tells the group his own dwarves to stand down from the fight after he a good talking to, Thorin realizes he does have the dragon sickness and realizes that moment wasn't earned for me. This movie is almost 2.5 hours. I don't want this to be any longer. And Thorin is cured from the dragon sickness and decides to fight the orcs, and again, it wasn't earned for. So far, it's the battle of the 4 armies. The 5th comes later in the fight. Thorin takes Fili, Kili, and Dwalin, his best men, to kill Azog for good. This time, Legolas, Tauriel, come into the fight, and Bilbo realizes they're heading up into a trap and tries to get them out of there. Tauriel stops Thranduil from ditching the dwarves and almost kills her, until Legolas comes in and fights the orcs with her. Fili dies, and Kili goes after Azog, and Azog fights Thorin, which did feel a little prolonged. And Bilbo fights with Dwalin on his side, and Bilbo gets knocked out, and that felt rather worthless. Meanwhile, Legolas flies on a bat, like the creature bat, the ones with the wings, which looked like terrible CGI, then shoots arrows at the orcs, and Tauriel fights Bolg, and Kili goes for the kill until he gets stabbed by Bolg. All this fighting around just felt endless, and some moves feel really bad CGI. For example, Legolas jumping from one step to the next on the bridge looked very cartoony as he kills Bolg. Then we get to Thorin versus Azog as they fight until Azog goes underneath the water and stabs Thorin in the foot, which is pretty cheap. That's when the 5th army comes in. The Eagles with Bjorn, and that's when the Battle of the 5 Armies title comes in for the last 15 minutes of the movie. That made no sense at all either, this title. I wish it was called There and Back Again. That was the original title, but no, they had to switch it to this. Thorin gets stabbed in the heart, and as does Azog, and Azog dies first. That's it for Thorin. I thought he was going to live when I first saw the movie. Thorin's funeral was sad, sure. Bilbo leaves the dwarves to go back to Bag End and goes back with the ring in his pocket, and we see Bilbo as we see him in Lord of the Rings, acting out as his beginning scene of the Fellowship of the Ring. I was kind of satisfied with that as an ending, but let's just face it, this is not a good chapter. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 4.5 out of 10. Too much fighting for this third half of a movie, because this isn't the movie at all. Just a fighting sport that goes on for 2.5 hours. The CGI looks really bad. The characters are just worthless, including Bilbo and Gandalf. Why is this made into 3 movies? Because Peter Jackson wanted that after The Lord of the Rings. And that felt very problematic. And I will be back next week with Tolkien. And until next time, let's escape Middle-earth for now, as it's ended.